Welcome back to the Dershow. It's election day. The polls are closing in a couple of hours. We'll probably see some exit polls from Pennsylvania and Michigan fairly soon, but I doubt we'll know the outcome of the election until late tonight at the earliest. I don't know who's going to win. At the end of the show, maybe I'll make a prediction, but I can't. My expertise is not in evaluating polls, but I am going to talk about how both candidates hurt their chances. Before we get into politics, though, got to get back to baseball. I got dozens and dozens of responses to my two baseball trivia questions. How do you have a perfect game pitched, and yet there's an error? And one person got that right. Everybody else got wrong answers. Most of the wrong answers were like, since the recognition of a perfect game relies solely on the pitcher's performance, an error by another player doesn't diminish what would otherwise be a perfect game. No, that's absolutely wrong. And remember the famous case a couple of years ago where a guy was pitching a perfect game, a no-hitter, a perfect game. And the last out, ground ball to shortstop. The shortstop threw it to the first baseman, and he was out by a step. And the umpire called him safe and denied him the perfect game. There's a TV program about it called something like the 28th out. Or in any event, an error by a player ruins a perfect game. So it's not completely a pitcher's game. But the answer to this one is so obvious and so simple. I'm surprised more people didn't get it. One or two people got it. Easy. Pop up to the first baseman in foul territory. First baseman drops the ball. Guy strikes out after on the next pitch. So there's an error, but nobody reaches base. For it to be a perfect game, nobody can reach base. Somebody said, oh, you reach base, and then he's thrown out going to second. No, that's not a perfect game. Or first base, and then he's picked off. No, that's not a perfect game. You can't reach first base. So the only perfect game with an error is one where one of the fielders drops a foul ball in foul territory. Nobody reaches, but it's listed as an error. The other one is much harder. No one has ever gotten the other one, including the commissioner of baseball. I put it to him one day when I was in the Red Sox owner's box, when I was still allowed in the Red Sox owner's box before I defended Trump. The commissioner of baseball was there, and he had been a former student. And so I put him the question of how do you get 4 outs. He went to a number of possibilities, but he couldn't figure it out. And one guy got it correct. I'll elaborate on it a little bit, but the guy who got it right said the following. Well, he had two things. Perfect game if the runner reaches on an error, but is thrown out trying to go to second. Okay, that's wrong. Fourth out. Now he gets the fourth out. This one he gets right. If a run appears to score and a team then tags a runner for out number 3, there needs to be and gets a force out at first to get an additional out to negate what would otherwise be a run scoring. So he got it right. He didn't do it particularly articulately, so let me try. Man on second. Man on third. By the way, I'm going to say men. I'm not going to say persons. Sorry if I'm politically incorrect, but baseball is a man sport. Okay, at the moment. Man on second. Man on third. 2 out. Scores tied. 3-2 count. Pitcher throws the ball. As soon as he throws the ball, both runners run. Particularly the guy at third runs, and he's very fast. And he crosses the plate. And shortly after he crosses the plate, the shortstop feels a ground ball from the batter and tags out the man who is running from second to third. But he tags out the guy running from second to third seconds after the guy from third crosses the plate. So the run counts unless there can be a force out. And so the shortstop throws to first base in time to get the runner. That negates the run, pulls back the run. 4 outs are recorded. The tag out is a real out. But they lose the game as the result of the tag out and the guy crossing over and crossing home plate. But the run gets restored, gets taken away if the force out occurs. And so the shortstop has the mental agility to realize that, throws to first base, and gets the guy out, the batter out. That happened once in baseball. It almost happened a couple of years ago. It's very esoteric, but it's interesting. I'd be interested to know if any of you disagree with me. The commissioner of baseball agreed that I was correct. He had some questions, by the way, about whether or not a dropped foul ball that doesn't result in anybody getting on base is an actual error, and the answer is yes. We checked it out. So that's my baseball trivia for the day. And now let's get to the more serious issue. So I'm going to state a proposition. I don't know who's going to win the election, but whoever loses, it will be a self-inflicted wound. Both candidates shot themselves in the foot. Both candidates did stupid things that may very well have cost them the election if they lose, but they may win. And so people will forget about the stupidity. Let's start with Kamala Harris. First decision she has to make. She's totally unqualified to be president. She's never run in a primary, never won anything. She's just plucked out of the vice presidency and put in the presidency, and she has to make her first decision, who to pick as vice president. And boy, does she blow it. She had picked Shapiro, the very popular governor of the most important swing state, Pennsylvania. We wouldn't even be watching television now. The election would essentially be over. The Democrats would win Pennsylvania. Probably the blue wall would survive. And they may still win Pennsylvania. But boy, it won't be due to anything smart that Kamala Harris did. She just did a dumb thing. And she did it for the basest of political reasons. Well, if I nominate a Jewish Zionist, this isn't 2000, where Joe Lieberman didn't lose them, in fact, gained them votes. This is 2024, where all the bigots are going to vote for me. I want the bigoted vote. I want the anti-Semitic vote. I want the Michigan voters to vote for me. And the Michigan voters, many of them won't vote for me if there's a Jew on my ticket, particularly if he's a Jewish Zionist. So let me look around. And who did she have to pick? She had to pick somebody less qualified than her, because she said to friends she wouldn't pick Shapiro because he's too articulate, too domineering, too ambitious. Those sound a little bit like stereotypes, the ambitious Jew. But she had to pick somebody less qualified, less ambitious, less experienced. That's a pretty damn low bar. And she managed to find somebody much worse as a candidate than she is, and that is Tim Walz. He has nothing going for him at all. He's not articulate. He doesn't seem particularly bright. Had no experience to speak of. Comes off, not particularly well. But, she may yet win the election as the result of making this choice. Would anybody really vote for Walz as president? And that's when you're voting for a vice president, you're voting for a president. Now, you can be critical of J.D. Vance, and many people are. But the one thing you can't say about J.D. Vance is that he's not smart. He's very smart. And it did take some guts for Trump to pick him, because he is very smart, much better educated than Trump, very articulate, and very domineering. He has a big presence on the screen, but I think that Trump had more self-confidence, and he appointed Vance, whereas Harris didn't have self-confidence. Was he the best choice? No, I don't think he was the best choice. It didn't broaden his base. Neither of the candidates really went to great efforts to broaden their base. They were both satisfied with getting the vote out for their base. I think Trump should have appointed Nikki Haley. Not only didn't he appoint her, and here I'm getting to his shooting himself in the foot, he didn't use her. He never campaigned with her. Sure, she ran against him, and so did Mike Pompeo, and so did, so many other people. But, Lincoln got it right when he appointed to his cabinet the people who ran against him. And Doris Kearns wrote a great book about that. But Trump can't do that. He can't be seen to be supportive of people who have undercut him and who have run against him, who have called him names. He's called everybody else in the world names. It's okay that he, insulted um, uh, so many candidates. Ted Cruz insulted him, his wife, and yet Ted loyally has supported President Trump. He's also running for reelection, so it serves his interest, but it serves the interests of President Trump. So I think President Trump made the wrong decision. I don't think it's worse for the country. I think for the country, Vance is very qualified. I think it hurt his chances of getting elected. I think his chance of getting elected would have increased dramatically had he done what John Kennedy did with Lyndon Johnson. And Kennedy didn't like Lyndon Johnson. Bobby Kennedy hated his guts. But they figured it would help him win Texas and help him win some states in the South and give him a road to 270, which it did. And, tragically, Kennedy was then shot and he became president. But he was qualified to be president. He had been the majority leader of the Senate and very, very prominent legislative actor. And so, so I think Trump made a serious mistake. Second serious mistake. You don't hire an insult comic to be on stage in the last week of the campaign. And if you do make that stupid mistake by hiring a very unfunny insult comic, you either vet his script, which nobody knows whether they did or not. I've heard two conflicting versions. Oh, they vetted it and they let it go by, or they didn't vet it and he just improvised. It doesn't matter. You do not insult 400,000 voters in Pennsylvania who love Puerto Rico, who regard it as their home, even if you didn't insult the Puerto Rican people, and even if you were referring to a garbage crisis that exists in Puerto Rico. That's not the way it came off. That's not the closing message. Indeed, I think Trump, if he loses, he will lose because his closing message was so negative and dour and down. And Kamala Harris, for all the vacuousness of everything she has been saying, her closing message at least was on script. It was upbeat. And obviously, some of the things that her boss, her current boss, and for the next few hours at least, Joe Biden said didn't help her. But basically, she put Biden in the basement. But she shouldn't have allowed him to speak. She really can't control it. He's the president of the United States, so I can't fault her for that. But Trump was out of control during his last week. If he had stuck to his script, if he had really been totally on message, totally controlled for the last 10 days, I think he would have increased his chances of winning the election. Again, I don't know. He may win the election. I don't know the answer to that question. But I can tell you that he hurt his chances considerably by the way he has acted in the last 10 days or so of the election cycle. And so I think it's very possible that during that period of time in the last week, from the night of the event in Madison Square Garden till the close of balloting today, I suspect there's been a change. I suspect that her voting base has increased and his has decreased or maybe remained the same. But I don't think he got a lot of votes added in the last week. And, particularly he had an obligation to get out the vote among young men, and particularly young men of color, including Hispanic young men. And you don't expect a young Hispanic man who loves Puerto Rico, lives in Puerto Rico some of the year. His family lives in Puerto Rico. Obviously, Puerto Ricans don't vote, but their family members do if they live in the United States. The idea that, I don't think, in fact, I know for absolute certainty, Trump didn't know he was going to make that stupid statement. You can't hold him responsible for that, except I'm talking about candidates shooting themselves in the foot and allowing an insult comic to get on the stage before you get on the stage, and just how the Democrats managed to exploit it. Maybe they did it unfairly. Maybe you shouldn't be held responsible if you're a candidate for a comedian any more than you should be held responsible if you're Kamala Harris for the garbage reference made by her boss, the current president of the United States. But we're talking about politics now. And in politics, you are held responsible. So I think we're seeing a lot of foot shooting and a lot of unforced errors and a lot of mistakes. And so in the end, nobody's going to win this election. Somebody's going to lose it. I don't know who. I don't know who. I will make a prediction. I think that Trump may very well have lost this election in the last week and handed it to Kamala Harris. She didn't win because she didn't say anything in the last week. She just talked about, joy and her typical stuff. But this is a two-person race. So if you hurt yourself, you help her. Even if it doesn't mean that more people are voting for her, but it means that people who would otherwise vote for you are not voting for you. Look, I could be dead wrong. And in the end, none of the last week could have mattered because, after all, so many votes had already been cast. So, maybe it didn't matter. But, most of the votes were not cast at the time of that Madison Square Garden disaster. And so I do think there were unforced errors. And I think he made more unforced errors than she did. And I'll say this, if she wins, it will be, at least in substantial part, as the result of unforced errors by Donald Trump. And I think he owed his voting public more. He should have been more disciplined. He should have stuck to his script. He should have been more positive and upbeat. He had a great message. All he should have done in the last 10 days was repeat one statement. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? If you're not, go back to who was president 4 years ago. That is a winning strategy. Why didn't he pursue it? He said it. There are plenty of ads on television because ads are scripted and ads are disciplined. But when he gets in front of the television guy, and you got to give him credit, he's been willing to talk. He's been willing to answer questions. She hasn't. So he's better in that regard than she is. I give him more credit. But politically, it may have been a serious mistake for him to go undisciplined, not use his winning strategy, and instead do what he did. Whereas what she did didn't get her any votes, I don't think, particularly, but she didn't lose any. And I think he lost some. So that's my prediction. Remember, I've said this before, why I'm so good at making legal predictions. I'm not good at making political predictions. I rarely make them. This is maybe the first time. No, I predicted Hillary Clinton would win. I rather would lose. I predicted Donald Trump would win. I wrote about it in 2016. So I'm 1-0 on my predictions in 2016. But I don't hold a lot of stock by my predictions here because I'm not an expert at analyzing polls. I am an expert at predicting Supreme Court decisions and judicial decisions. And I'm right about those predictions because I never let my preference interfere with my prediction. Prediction is science. Preference is, emotional and personal. The same thing is true here. I'm not telling you I prefer one outcome to the other. I am telling you that, as somebody who's followed this very carefully, if I had to bet widows and orphans money, if I had to make a bet that I couldn't afford to lose, I would go against what the betting odds are now. The betting odds are still in favor of Trump. I would place a bet, and I'd probably get some good odds, and I guess I would place that bet on Harris. It's not telling you who I think should win. It's telling you who I think may win. So let's see. Let's see. By tomorrow, I may be full of apologies. I'm not going to say I told you so because that's a speculative, and I will never tell anybody who to vote for. Okay, one question. Oh, this is interesting. Going back, going back to baseball for 1 minute. Do you think Armando Galarraga deserves to be retroactively awarded a perfect game? The ESPN documentary, 28 Outs, an imperfect story, makes a great case for it. Absolutely. He ought to get a perfect game. Baseball ought to recognize its mistakes. Pete Rose ought to be put in the Hall of Fame. There are a lot of things wrong, and baseball has the ability to make them right. Um, okay, somebody says he's wrong about the butterfly ballot. It was perfectly legal in Florida in 2000. No, it was not. It was absolutely illegal, but the Democrats consented to it. But it didn't make it legal. The statute and the regulations provide that you have the holes to the right of each candidate. And what they did is they put all the holes in the middle to save a couple of dollars, and that caused enormous confusion. So no, it wasn't legal, but it was consented to by the Democrats, so they didn't have a lot of standing to object to it. I got about 25 of these. Dershowitz ripping into Carville was surprisingly entertaining. People loved my attack on James Carville. The guy is such a schmuck. And why anybody pays attention to him? Since I did that, I must have gotten 25 emails from him, obviously asking me to vote Democrat. And every one of them had a curse word in it, the F and this and that. That's the way he does it. He didn't even originally come up with it's the economy, stupid. That had been part of what's called the KISS phenomenon in the Army. Keep it simple, stupid. And he just borrowed it. He's not original or creative, and he's not smart. And he's not a good legal analyst and or political analyst. So I have nothing but contempt for him. And apparently that contempt is widely shared, including by several of my writers from Louisiana. Yeah. Oh, this is interesting. I didn't know this. I was unclear about this, and a number of the letters corrected me. It was the Democrats who run the ad to lie to your spouse. Yeah. Well, I haven't lied to my spouse, and I would never do that. I don't think people should have to lie to their spouses. But, we live in such a divided country that people do have to lie to their bosses. People do have to lie probably to get into college. If you publicly state in your college application that you voted for Trump, I think it's very likely you would be turned down in some colleges and universities, not others. And you would be canceled on your campuses. So I can understand why people lie about who they voted for. Okay. Okay, so we don't know who's going to win this election. We're going to watch previous elections. I watched the first election of Barack Obama at an event in my home with John Henry and other old friends, and we celebrated with champagne. I watched the 2016 election. We were expecting to go and celebrate with Hillary Clinton. She was celebrating in New York, just down the block from us. And of course, that didn't happen. We had a bunch of friends, mostly Democrats, some Republicans. The Republicans went into one room and they were quietly cheering, and most of the Democrats went home early when it was fairly clear that their candidate, our candidate, my candidate couldn't win. 2020, again, watching with people, even back as recently as 2020, the division wasn't as sharp. I think the divisions became even sharper when Trump lost the election and refused essentially to acknowledge that he lost the election. By the way, I think that is another unforced error. I think him saying, "Well, I shouldn't have left the White House." Of course, he meant that differently. He didn't mean that he should have defied the law and stayed in the White House, notwithstanding the vote of the Senate. What he was basically saying, if I had stayed, the borders would be secure. But he is so careless with his language. And when you're running for president, the other side's going to take everything you say out of context. Both sides take everything they say out of context. For example, there's an ad in which they have Trump saying, you don't hear a word before, a word after. You're not even sure it's his voice, but he said, women who have abortions have to be punished in some way. I don't think that that's his policy, but that's in an ad. And there have been so many ads that have been so misleading and so distorted. And this whole campaign has been misleading and distorted. And so, whoever loses is going to blame it on these distortions, blame it on the media. Again, my hope and prayer for America is that whoever wins this election wins it cleanly, honestly, and by so many votes that the loser can't complain. I hope that for either side. There's a part of me that would get great joy, Schadenfreude, improper joy at the suffering of others, if the Democrats were to lose a close election and challenge it, then the same people who were complaining about Trump were to go to court and complain to the judges and the 65 Project were to praise them rather than attack them. So so let's go and let's watch the election returns. Don't jump to conclusions. I remember watching the 2000. It was when John Kerry was running, and John had been a friend of mine. I'm not sure if he's talking to me anymore, but he had been a friend of mine, and so my wife and I were invited to watch the election with his family in Boston. And we were watching the election, and his campaign manager came over to me. A couple of hours into the watching of the election, it really looked like Kerry was going to win. And I think it was Trump's reelection campaign that Kerry was going to win. And he asked me to make a list of students that I thought would be willing and able to serve in a John Kerry administration. And I did. I made a whole list of students who I thought would be great, and for all kinds of offices, cabinet positions, other positions. And then, of course, suddenly the bottom fell out, and it became very clear that later voting and later counting was going to give the election to the incumbent Bush rather than the challenger Kerry. In retrospect, boy, am I glad that happened. Bush was a much better president than Kerry would have been. Kerry has been a major, major disappointment. He has really been one of the leaders of the Let's Befriend Iran group. Let's be nice to them and they'll be nice to us. What a fake argument. So, I remember watching so many election nights, and I don't know whether I'm going to enjoy watching this one. We're watching it with some friends. I will be the only person in the room that is not an enthusiastic Harris supporter. All the others in the room will be cheering for Harris. I will not be cheering for Harris, and we'll wait and see what the election holds. See you tomorrow. We'll know more then. We may not know who won the election. I suspect we will. So watch. If you haven't voted yet, get the hell out and vote. Come on, you got to vote. Even if you vote for a third party or you vote nobody or you write in a friend, you got to vote. So see you tomorrow.